Martin. Okay. Oh. How are you this morning, Gabby?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
I'm president to you, Eriech.
Yes. Something like that. Good morning, good morning. Join us on this side. Got some open seats. Front row. Front row is always hard to get, but welcome y'all to the final class today. Woo! Excited for that. This morning we have a distinguished speaker coming in. This is Kari Watkins. She's the executive director for the Oklahoma City Bombing and Memorial. She's been there since, I believe, 1996, where she was hired on as a communications director and has spearheaded the effort to building a memorial there and bringing about the memories and finding common ground there. So she's going to talk to us today about this idea of finding common ground. They have a speaker series that's going on right now. I'm assuming she'll touch on that. And this next Tuesday, they have Jennifer Meckling. She is my neighbor, so I'll be jumping on for that, but it'll be exciting there. So I'll hand it over to Kari, and she can kind of lead us on things. So, Kari?
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. I just would say today, let's focus in your last class period just on what we can do together to work together and find common ground. And that's the challenge I want to leave you with as you head out of your semester is what you can do to bring people together who don't look like you, think like you, who will push you to think outside your local safety circle. And we have a project as he said on Tuesdays at noon, and it's a thing called Better Conversation, a program called Better Conversations, and Jennifer does Tuesday. Her topic is what do we create? How do we create? An environment that fosters belonging, encourage us to speak up. And then the following Tuesday we have a Philadelphia Phillies player and Taylor Gooch, a PGA player. What would it take for respect to occur among others with opposing views? And then the 18th, we talk about if you could teach one thing to the generation before and after you, what would that be? And that's where I want to start today. And then we end the month with, are there any rules or laws that have affected your sense of security? But I'm going to assume most of you were born after 1995. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have one person who was born
Before.
Yeah.
So if you guys could teach one thing to the generation before or after you, what would that be?
She's asking you, so.
I'm asking you guys, what would that be?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was
You got
thinking-
something?
No.
How to be more accepting to change.
How to be more accepting to change.
That's a great one.
Throw out another one.
How to be progressive.
How to be progressive.
And what do you mean by that?
Go ahead. What do you mean by that?
Like, how to keep changing as things change in the world around them. Be progressive with it.
So changing as things in the world change.
I think that's such a great one. I think that's something we have to really all push ourselves with.
Aware that we don't have to look, we also have to look after people's emotional well-being.
We have to look after people's emotional well-being.
And
Right.
acknowledge that mental illness is a thing and that it's going to affect our society if we don't take care of it.
And the effects of mental health on our society.
So true.
Something on this side. What's something you want to teach the next generation? I'll just speak up for a second while people on this side are thinking. I wrote a letter to my cousin about things he should be doing as a graduate and the ability to flourish as an individual by understanding that people around you are your brothers and sisters is important.
Yeah. So the idea of better conversations started, we actually started this pre-COVID, if you guys can believe it or not. We've been doing it since February of 2020. And when we kicked it off to a room of 250 or so at a luncheon, and there were no issues. I mean, we didn't even know COVID really existed. That's kind of the bubble we all live in sometimes. I think that's a challenge is, sometimes we have to realize there are things going on outside the world that could impact us or do impact others. And so therefore it could impact us. But honestly, when we did this in February 2020, we were a little oblivious to what the world was going through. I remember Becky and Barry Switzer asked me one day, what are you going to do if this virus gets to America and impacts the marathon? I'm like, what? Surely not. And lo and behold, in about 30 days, our world can stop. And so I think when we talked about better conversations, we talked about how my parents' generation, which are in their 70s and 80s, and my generation in 40s and late 40s, 50s, and then your generation, which are my kids' generation, are 16 and 18. How do we all get along? How do we all sit down at a table and have a discussion? When the world was pretty vile at the time, the leader of the free country would say whatever he wanted to say whenever he wanted to say it. How do we make sure our words matter? And then on the grounding virtues of, if you guys want these cards, get me your address and I'll send you a deck of these cards. But grounding virtues are what we practice, we become. And I just want to go over those 6 grounding virtues, if you guys don't mind taking some notes. But words that matter, words we use shape how we understand ourselves and how we interpret the world and how we treat others. Words that matter shape ourselves, how we interpret the world, and how we treat others. I think that's really important. And then humility. Humility is a companion to curiosity, surprise, and delight. Spiritual humility is not about getting small, it's about encouraging others to be big. So humility is not the weak way out, is what I'm saying here, is that being humble and being willing to serve and listen to others is really making sure that we are all in this together, and that I'm willing to serve you by whatever you need, but having a humility to serve others and to at the same time work on other areas of surprise and delight, and then being curious. Generous listening. Being a generous listener. This is really hard for a lot of people because we like to talk. But listening is more than being quiet while others have their say. It's about a presence as much about receiving. It's about a connection more than observing. So generous listening is taking the time to listen to what others have to say and to be willing to be in their space and to hear them, not argue with them, not debate them, but just hear their side of the story. And think about the power of generous listening. If we could do that with our friends, with our family, with our parents, with our grandparents, that's something that really we have to work on together. Hospitality. Hospitality, I think, is one of those words that like my mom uses, or what's hospitality have to do with a bunch of college kids? And I would just say it's the bridge to all great virtues, but it's immediately accessible. You don't have to love or forgive or feel compassion to extend hospitality. You just have to be kind, stepping up to be kind. And that's really one of the Oklahoma standards, which I'm going to kind of wrap up with the Oklahoma standards in a bit, but we'll come back to hospitality. It's just stepping up and helping others. And then practicing patience is the 5th grounding virtue. Human transformation takes time. I cannot fix my problems overnight. I cannot fix an issue that may have caused me to think one way or to act one way overnight. And so changing and true change in our country takes time. And usually it's longer than we want it to last, but it's necessary for social transformation. So this transformation that started in our country really a year ago this coming month, I hope we continue to see it progress, but it takes patience, and it takes all of us being willing to jump in and be a part of that social transformation. A long, patient view of time will replenish our sense of our capacities and our hope in the world. So if we can be patient and keep working at it, not be patient and be on the sideline and not be participatory, but be participatory and be patient at the same time. And then have adventurous civility. What does that mean? Well, civility in our world is, I think lacking. We've gotten much better after the president spoke to Congress the other night. I asked my 84-year-old dad what he thought, because his view is much different than mine and certainly much different than my kids. I don't want to get political here today, but from my dad's perspective, he felt like, the president was handing out everything for free and da da da. And I'm like, Dad, wasn't it just good to hear a calm, civil presentation surrounded by two women? One of them happened to be African American. I mean, let's look at the progress. And we had this very civil conversation, and it was good for me to hear his perspective, and it was good for him to hear my perspective. And really, at the end of the conversation, we were both glad we had that discussion, but we did it civilly without yelling or raising our voices or getting frustrated with each other. And so what's important on civility is knowing that, while people may be different, and they may be profoundly different, we may profoundly disagree on things, it is just as much your right to have your opinion as it is for me to have mine. Does that make sense to you guys? That your opinion to you may be every bit as important to you as mine is to me. I hope it is. And even if we don't agree, it's okay to have different opinions. When we were building the memorial, so this is about 26 years ago, 25 years ago, we were in the process of closing the street, which is now the reflecting pool. How many of you have been to the memorial before? We gotta get some of you down here.
Yeah.
And so the reflecting pool is where the truck parked. There was a rider moving van full of 4,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate, fertilizer, and racing fuel. And that was something that on that street caused the destruction of the Murrah building. You can Google this and look it up, but it was enormous impact on the street. Well, we wanted to close that street to become part of the memorial site. We didn't know what it would become. Today, it's a 380-foot reflecting pool. We didn't know that at the time we were arguing to close the street. And we stood in front of the city council and the traffic commission and made this plea to close the street. And we gave a presentation, my board chairman did, and what I consider to be one of the greatest presentations we've given on why it was important to keep that street closed and to move forward. And as Bob Johnson sat down, our founding chairman, up rose a young African-American young man that lived in the apartments just west of us. And he made an equally powerful of a presentation. It was just unbelievable. And he stands up and explains why that street should be open. And I remember at the ripe old age of 27, sitting there and rocking kind of back and forth on that pew in the city council chambers, thinking, really for the first time, and I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit this, but I want to talk to you about that, is, oh my gosh, to this young man, he believes every bit as strongly in what he's presenting as we did and what we presented. It just was two different sides of the story. So how do we get to the middle? Well, on Monday, 2 weeks ago Monday, when we had the 26th anniversary commemoration, that young man, now 26 years older, was sitting in the audience, and he still continues to make an impact on our life and our operations of this site. But it was because we had to have civility, and we had to practice civility, and we had to recognize the fact that even though we don't agree on this, we would come together somehow to agree. City council would go on to vote 8-0 in our favor, and yet he was very kind about it, and he was patient in our progress, and he displayed hospitality, and he was a great listener as we talked about our plan. And he continues to be very humble and kind, and he speaks incredible words. But I think about how he really set a standard for us 25 years ago that began to build this place. And even though he didn't agree with what we were doing at the time, he's come to love it and respect it, and now is an important part of it. But he was willing to take a stand for what he believed. And that's so important. And it's important that all of us are willing to sit down and have these discussions. So one of the things we believe, there are two points I want to talk to you about today before I get off. And one is, I want to ask you guys this question. How does your generation respond to injustice? And I'm just going to ask a few questions and you guys give me some answers if that's okay. How does your generation respond to injustice?
A big social media presence.
Great.
Yeah, Ray, speak loudly.
I was gonna say that.
She was going to say the same thing.
Okay.
Social media presence.
So that means you would fight for the injustice on social media. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. And I mean fight in the right word.
There's some other things.
Protest.
Protesting.
Okay. Those are good.
What are some of those examples of protesting that your generation has done?
Like actual examples. I
Mhm.
don't know, like BLM protests, like over the summer.
Black Lives Matter.
March for Our Lives.
March for Our Lives. What are other things you're doing for injustice? Yeah.
Self-fusion hate.
I think it's important on those things to realize that we, protesting is an important, very important way to get your point across, as long as you don't cross the line of violence. I'm assuming you guys all agree with that, right?
Ray says stop Asian hate violence. Excuse me.
Yeah, violence cannot be tolerated. How do we create an environment that fosters, to your generation, how do we create an environment that fosters belonging and yet the courage to speak up?
Repeat the question one more time, Kerry.
How do we create an environment that fosters belonging and the courage to speak up?
Yeah, Michaela and Abdul. Go ahead, Michaela. Speak loudly.
By teaching kids in school that it's okay that they can voice their opinions.
So teaching children in school that it's okay to voice their opinions. Yeah, Abdul.
From allowing people to express their own diversity through political, ethnic, racial, sexual.
How do we allow them to express that stuff?
Just by not judging people based on that.
Yeah, so not judging people based on multitude of factors. Yeah, Ray.
Right.
Presenting like more identities in like the government and like higher power people.
Yeah, so presenting more identities within.
Like different races, different sexualities, all of that. So that people feel more comfortable, like there's someone who's similar to their identity, like in a sense of power.
I know one thing, a small thing OU did on this was that if you've ever been in the political science department or law departments, they have the wall of old white men. You see it in a lot of buildings, but they're taking those down to create inclusivity. There's some other things.
Just like allowing everyone a right to voice their opinion, no matter what they say, they have their First Amendment right, they have a right to express how they feel.
Yeah, so respecting First Amendment rights.
Well, I think one of the things we have to really look at is our fellow people. I mean, look around your classroom and you begin to see, is there a way to get along? Can you get along on everything? Can you figure out a way to disagree without spewing hate? And I think that's one of the things we saw in January with the Capitol riots, is that while we live in this great country, they had the right to protest. They did not have the right to cross that line of violence. And I think that's something that we have to really make sure we, as an institution here at the Memorial, we know the impact of violence. We've seen it firsthand. We've lived it. We've carried these families through it. We're watching it. But there's a fine line for me having the gumption to stand up for what we believe is right and to peacefully protest those, in support of the beliefs, but to understand what goes beyond a peaceful assembly. And that's something I think even with Black Lives Matter, they had some great protests, and then in their view, it was important to keep that going. But when violence is how it ends, it does away with the good that happens. And I think that's something we have to really make sure we work on as a country and as people, of how we can make our point without destroying other people's property that did nothing wrong. And so, I would just say it's okay for you to believe what you believe, but it's not okay for us to demand others believe the same way. I may have one point of view and you may have one point of view, but it doesn't mean you're right and I'm wrong. And that's a really hard thing for all of us to understand. All generations, my parents' generation, my generation, and your generation. And so while you and I may not agree on the same thing, can we agree that it's okay for all of us to have different perspectives? And that's a question I have for you. Do you guys see life that way or not?
Yes,
Yes. Why?
because I think it's important like to have a discussion with someone and being able to respect their views while also like giving your opinion. Like you don't always have to argue or like be certain that you have to change their mind. You can take what they say and say like, I respect that's how you think, but this is how I feel on that topic, and like being able to have a respectful conversation without like spreading violence or an uproar, I think is really important to like actually make things better and to change society.
And you can hear them, right, Kerry?
Yeah, I heard that's good. Yeah, I agree. I think if you want to influence others, you got to let your daily living do the talking. And when getting your opinion heard means hurting others, often some of those people are innocent. It kind of reduces your impact. So that's one of the things I tell my own teenagers. If you want to influence others, let your daily living do the talking. That's a motto we have in our house that I really believe strongly in. And I think as you guys, you have such an influence, you have such a great perspective, your generation does, that I think you really are going to be the world changers. And I say that sincerely. I watch my own two kids and think, oh my gosh, they've learned so much. And I think you guys have such an opportunity to really influence all people. And I don't say people on both sides because I don't know what the sides are. I just think you have an opportunity to influence so many people by making sure people still feel like they're part of a situation, even though they may disagree with you. Even when you're with the staff, or if you're in a classroom, you're in your sorority or fraternity or dorm, wherever you go to your summer job. One of the questions I say is, can we belong even when we disagree? And I hope the answer is yes. I hope you're creating an environment, or you're in an environment where you feel like you can belong even if you don't agree with something. And chances that you're going to agree with your boss or your parents or your faculty or the institution 100% of the time probably is unrealistic. We're probably going to always see things differently. Sometimes as a boss, I make a decision that people may not like or may not really understand. And so sometimes you got to sit down and take the time to explain why you made that decision. And sometimes there's not time to do that. Over the last year, we made a lot of decisions COVID wise, when we go to work, when we don't go to work, when we open, when we don't open, all those decisions. And not every single person can have the same insight and influence as some others. And so sometimes your job, your role is just to go do your very best in whatever that job is. And I don't know what the jobs are. And then sometimes you get to be a part of that decision making. We had a discussion here yesterday with people who are the hourly visitor services people, all the way to the security director and facilities. A lot of people saying, do we continue the mask after midnight Friday when the ordinance goes away? And for me, I thought the people on the front line had some of the best perspectives because they're doing it every day. And could we highly encourage versus mandating masks? Or would staff want to stay in masks? Of course they would, because we have visitors here from all over the country. But if I disagreed with that, and some people in the room might have, do they still belong? Can they still be part of the culture? And that's something I think we all have a role in as we go out and into our own environments, is how we create a sense of belonging even when people don't agree with us. And I would just really challenge you guys to think about that when you're with your group of friends or your family or your coworkers, of how you can work to get along and belong together even when you don't agree. And maybe you can learn something from them and they can learn something from you. But again, If you want to influence others, let your daily living do the talking, because people will look at you and say, man, those kids got something I want. They get something I need to understand. And they're more open to understanding things. So one of our goals has been is how to come together on this sacred ground to find common ground. And so we've created these better conversations weekly, and they're online. In the summer, we're going to have some under the survivor tree in the evenings, and I hope you'll watch for that. Would love to have you guys be a part of those for college age kids, and just to come together under the survivor tree, and just to work to go over discussion points, or have a topic of the week that may be something you're really thinking about, how we can do better as a society on different issues. And so we want people to come to this sacred space that was created after a bomb happened and people died here, and many people survived it. And this standard became known as the Oklahoma Standard. And I want to talk about that as I wrap up, but how do we come on this sacred ground to find common ground? And that's something that I really do hope we've spent a year working on through classrooms, through ninth grade Oklahoma history classes, through visits to the museum, through virtual visits, through first person talks, through you name it, we've done it over the last year. Virtual Hope Trunks. If you go to memorialmuseum.com, you can see our virtual assets and what we make available. Videos that are very powerful from the fire chief, from a survivor, from a family that lost their dad and their husband. Great, really powerful stories that begin to explain this story. But how do we continue to come together on the sacred ground to find common ground is something we'll work on for the next year or so as we work toward the next April. But as I wrap up the next few minutes today, I want to talk to you about the Oklahoma Standard. And does anyone in the room, have you ever heard the term Oklahoma Standard?
2, 3, 4.
You know what it means? So after the bombing in 1995, the national media, the big time network anchors looked at Oklahoma and couldn't believe how Oklahomans helped Oklahomans, blown away by it. They had just covered the 1993 World Trade Center tower, the first World Trade Center bombing, and they couldn't believe how different Oklahomans treated their neighbors. And this is a true story. This isn't me writing this. This is the network anchors for the 3 major networks. And they looked around and they were absolutely knocked over by how Oklahomans took care of Oklahomans. And so one of our goals is to make sure your generation, the next generation, knows the tenets of the Oklahoma Standard. What is it that people did in 1995 we want to carry forward? And you want to show up to serve. Service, honor, and kindness are the 3 tenets that Oklahoma became known for. Service, show up to serve. And that was inspired by the first responders, the volunteers, and just the Oklahomans, the citizens who came in 1995 bringing their boots and dog treats and food for the rescue workers and cards and letters. And I just encourage you guys, for looking for a place to show up to serve, if that's your church or your synagogue or your school or your club, find a place this summer that you can go serve someone, that you can give back, that you can give of yourself, beyond yourself, that you can give back. And it's maybe an hour or 2 a week, maybe it's Whiz Kids, helping kids get caught up in the summer. Whatever it is, find something that you can go to serve and do something for others. Visit okcmarathon.com and come help us volunteer in the marathon in the fall. We'd love to have you sign up or run, but if you go volunteer, you serve others and you begin to give of yourself. You begin to understand how powerful that is to give of yourself. And then you rise up to honor. If you haven't been to the museum, I'd love to put your name on a list and welcome you here anytime. Or bring one of your friends and come down and visit the outdoor side or come inside and understand where this standard was born and why it was so powerful to the nation and to the world as they watched Oklahomans taking care of Oklahomans. But we want to continue to promote service, honor, and kindness as we move forward. And you guys are key to that. And then finally, stepping up to be kind. Little things we do on a daily basis that can make the lives of those around us so much brighter. It doesn't take a tragedy. It should not take a tragedy for us to come together. But the bombing did show us who we were. It did reveal Oklahomans as great people. And I think we knew that. But we don't want to lose that. As Sam Presti, the general manager of the Thunder, says, we don't want to lose that with this next generation, because we need to work to keep it that way. Service, honor, and kindness. And if you can do those three things, it makes those better conversations even easier. Those two go hand in hand. And it makes it valuable when we can say, you know, those are characteristics, or those are tenets that we value as people, of making sure that we really do believe we can be good neighbors and good citizens and good friends. But if you rise to the occasion, if you be the difference and you see the moment, so rise to the occasion. When you see an opportunity to help, you do your part. Be the difference. We can be the variable when that positively affects the outcome. Be the difference maker. And then see the moment. We are aware of others around us and respond accordingly. I think in a world where we see so much inward taking care of ourselves, we want to make sure we look out and take care of others. So I'm just challenging you to take this action in your school, your work, your community, your home, and live out the Oklahoma standard. I'm happy to take questions or comments. Or
Gary's got a few minutes for questions. Just I have a question. I'll start us off, and somebody else can ask one. Maybe we'll get two in. Over the years of being there, what's the one thing you've personally learned, Kari?
That's a great question. I think for me personally, I've probably learned to slow down a little bit, to calm down, and just to enjoy your day. I think of all places to work, you know, we should understand the quality of generous and being generous and considerate and friendly. But sometimes in the world of getting, you know, you get in a hurry, or you try to get through each day, you forget, or you just plow through things and you don't want to plow through people, but you kind of do sometimes when you're just in a mode to get your work done. And I think COVID reminded me of that too. Just, you know, just take time to enjoy what you have. And there are families that went to work that day, their loved ones went to work that day and didn't get to come home. And they didn't go to war. They weren't dressed in military gear and armed with weapons to protect themselves. They went to work in an office, just like I'm sitting here, just like you're in a classroom. And so I think just to take time to enjoy life a little bit. And I don't mean wild, crazy partying. I mean just being kind and friendly and patient and trying to get along. To know that in my own neighborhood, my own cul-de-sac, you know, there's 6 houses and there are probably 4 different religions among those 6 houses. I don't know. But it doesn't matter. It's like they're good people. They're humans. They deserve to breathe the same air. And even if our skins are different, our beliefs are different, our religions are different, that doesn't matter. What matters is that we're willing to help each other. And so I think for me, and I keep reminding myself, and your questions remind me again, it's just to take time to enjoy the day and make the best of today, because we're not promised another day.
How has COVID affected the museum?
How has COVID affected the museum?
That's another great question. We were closed, the museum and the memorial. The museum was closed 87 days, and the memorial was closed, like blocked off for about, I think, 60 days. So I was just looking at our numbers before I dialed in, and we're about 50% of where we were in 2019. So we're ahead of where we were this time last year, because we weren't open, obviously. So we're obviously ahead. We reopened June 10th. But we've worked hard to keep the special feeling of the Memorial Museum, and we require masks, we require your social distance, we do time ticketing to try to spread people out. But it has been an operational challenge, and the staff's done a really remarkable job of adjusting to it. We've done some incentives for the staff. I will say I'm proud we didn't lay anybody off in that time, and we paid everybody, and we just worked remotely. But we all came back June 10th, almost a year ago, and haven't really looked back. COVID was happened during our 25th year. So we couldn't have the anniversary ceremony in person. That was online. And most of the things we had planned to do, we didn't get to do. And so that was a bummer, but it was no different than everybody else was going through. So we can't really cry about that too much, because everybody was living that life. And so I think for us, it's caused us to take a look at things. While the museum was closed those days, we had some exhibits that were planned ahead of time. We went ahead and put those in. We added a couple more. It allowed us to do a few things we couldn't have done. But for the most part, it stopped just like it did for everybody else. It just showed us inside what we had to do to keep working to bring people inside. And I think because we don't receive government funding, we're funded by what we make in the museum entrance, through an endowment, museum store sales, and our marathon. And we didn't get to have the marathon in person, it was virtual. So we had about half the participants. It was a hard year, but we had PPP and other things that we could do to survive. And so like most businesses, it impacted us about the same.
Anybody have one more question or anything? Let's give Kerry a round of applause for joining us today. Yeah, I want to challenge you all, if you have not been to the Oklahoma City, the museum, go. And if you have been, go. Every time I go there, because I have a great connection with one of the reporters from the Oklahoman, Diana Baldwin. She covered the daycare there that was in the bombing, the children that perished that day. That museum always makes me cry. Always makes me cry, but it always reminds me, as Kerry said, we're not promised another day, and to make the most of the day. So
if you guys want to come, I'll just say my email is kw@okcnm, Nancy Mary, okcnm.org. Send me an email. I'll leave you tickets at the front, or I'll send you a deck of cards if you want them. But thank you guys for having me.
yeah, thank you so much, Kerry. And I'll send them your email. So
okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.